Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Rupert Blackstone, Chair of the Energy, Environment and Sustainability Group at the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. And I'm pleased to introduce this month's EESG webinar on Waste as a Resource by Ian Arbon. Ian is a founder member and past chair of EESG. He has given numerous EESG lectures and webinars in the past. And he was also the lead author of the original Waste as a Resource document back in 2009. He'll talk for around 40 minutes and then there'll be just under 20 minutes for questions at the end. So I'll pass on to Ian now.
Well, good morning. My name's Ian Arbon, and I'm here to talk to you today to the subject of waste as a resource, a sustainable way forward. I wrote a paper of the same name together with Gary Grant, the MD of Recycle at Supply Limited, who unfortunately is not able to be with us today, but I'll try to field for him as well as I can. By way of personal introduction, I'm the unusual combination of a career businessman, chartered engineer, chartered environmentalist, and part-time academic, so I address this topic from much more than the viewpoint of a single vested interest. I've spent over 50 years in manufacturing industry, mostly in the UK, but also in the Netherlands, Germany, and the USA. I started as an apprentice and worked through many roles in industry before moving into senior corporate management as MD, chairman of several major UK businesses. For most of these 50 years, I've supplied sophisticated engineered equipment into the energy from waste industry around the globe and know the sector very well. And for the past 15 years as a visiting professor, successively at Newcastle, Glasgow and Strathclyde universities, I've taught MSc, MEng modules, which included all of the topics presented in this webinar, so it's not new for me if it is for other people. And since 2006, I've been the Institution of Mechanical Engineers champion for waste as a resource. My colleague and co-author Gary has also provided his personal introduction. And I won't spend a lot of time on it, but you can see he's got a great deal, 25 years involvement directly hands-on in the waste management, recycling and supply chain sectors, and has been a brilliant co-author for me in producing this revised Waste as a Resource paper. So, introduction to the webinar. The webinar itself is designed to provide background and introduction to IMechE's Waste as a Resource WAR policy statement, which is being relaunched today. The original WAR policy statement was published in April 2009 and proposed a radical rethinking of the government's waste policy, which even then was not working properly. Since there has been little improvement in the UK's waste policy in the intervening decade or so, the WAR policy statement has been fully revised and updated, but its message is largely unchanged. So we'll start with what we mean by the waste hierarchy. In the late 1990s, it became increasingly common to try to formulate a hierarchy to prioritize the various types of waste management. DEFRA's Waste Strategy 2000 proposed such a waste hierarchy as an effective way of dealing with waste management. This waste hierarchy was revised and improved over the intervening years and eventually followed the familiar format expressed in terms of the 5 R's of reduce, reuse, recycle, recover, reject. There have been many versions of it since, but I still like to go back to the original 5 R's. So the conventional representation of the waste hierarchy is like this. We usually show it as an inverted triangle, and at the top, the most sustainable thing for us to do is to reduce waste, followed second tier by reuse, followed by recycle, followed by recover, and finally, what we don't really want to do, reject. And just to flesh that out a bit, reduce simply means do not generate waste items in the first place. This is easily the best thing that we can do, but we've honestly not been very good at it. Secondly, reuse, which is another use for the same item, finding another thing to do with that item. And third, where we start running into problems, is recycle, which has become a rather hackneyed term. In its original meaning, it means turn into a different item. This is where it differs from reuse. But unfortunately, various people have turned this term into something that doesn't mean that anymore. And in some places it's used just as a synonym for source separation of waste, for example, which is really unhelpful. Fourth item is to recover, and by that we usually mean heat and power. And then fifth, which is reject, is usually dispose to landfill, the least desirable of the item of the tiers in the hierarchy. But there are problems with this, and the problems mainly lie with the way in which the waste hierarchy has been implemented over the past 20 years or so. First of all, it has not encouraged the necessary levels of waste reduction, the first tier of the hierarchy. Reductions claimed are often the result of redefinition of waste rather than genuine prevention or reduction. And reuse, the second year, has also not been widely practiced in the UK and is unlikely to increase in a developed throwaway society where it is very much cheaper to replace with brand new imported products than to repair, refurbish, or renovate. Now, this is not to decry the excellent work that is done by the likes of Gumtree and eBay, but those are not government initiatives, nor are the results of those processes recorded in government statistics. Recycling and composting, third tier, has been the mistaken focus of UK government policy in recent years. Recycling targets are not well designed to achieve true climate change mitigation. Market demand for recyclate is variable, leading to large stockpiles of unused recyclable materials. Energy recovery, the fourth tier, has been confused with incineration by both government and NGOs, leading to energy recovery being seen as the least desirable solution. And rejection of waste, the fifth tier, that is by landfilling, continues in large volumes, and the various plans to phase out landfills have been abandoned. In September 2019, the Scottish Government, and Scotland's where I live, had to defer its 2021 landfill ban to 2025 and may well struggle to meet that. So none of these problems is new or recently discovered. I've been looking at these issues for the past quarter century. They're not new. As long ago as the early 2000s, engineering institutions such as IMechE started to realize that the waste hierarchy was not doing its job, and that successive governments' policy of treating waste as a problem was not working. This situation led to the formulation of the concept of waste as a resource, or WAR, and the development of the interinstitutional WAR project. So just to take you through a bit of background on how all this came to pass. It started really with the Institution of Civil Engineers State of the Nation report. They used to produce a State of the Nation every year, and this was the one from October 2005. And it said this: the past 12 months have continued to show the denial and disconnected thinking with which the government, businesses, and the public approach the subject of waste. In this country, waste is seen as an end, a dead end, rather than a means. That view has to change. Waste is a combination of materials, our resources for tomorrow. If we extract reusable materials, what's left is residual waste, solid material containing energy that can be released to light rooms, heat buildings, and drive businesses. That was quite an amazing thing to be able to say at that time. But the sad fact is that we could say virtually the same thing in 2022, because very little has happened in terms of that point of view. Slightly before that, in March 2005, ICE and the then RPA, now the Renewable Energy Association, joined forces to produce a document called Quantification of the Potential Energy from Residuals in the UK. This introduced the concept of waste as resource. And it was referenced in the State of the Nation report I've just referred to. This new ICE RPA report said, a report published by ICE and the Renewable Power Association measuring the potential energy from residual waste estimated that by 2020, 17% of all electricity could theoretically come from waste. A more realistic but still very significant contribution would be 10%. Now, that's an interesting statement on two counts. One is that the energy that could be recovered from the residual waste is only thought of in terms of electricity, and there's no mention there of heat, which of course would provide, much more heat could be provided than electricity. But also the fact that, or the prediction that we could produce 10% of all of our electricity from waste, or energy from waste, is remarkable, because in 2005, the target for 2010 was 10% of all electricity to come from renewables. That target was not achieved and was missed by a very significant margin. And it's interesting to conjecture what could have happened if anybody had taken notice of this report and acted on it. But in August 2005, the institutions of civil engineers and of mechanical engineers joined forces to form a joint project team to further investigate the concept of waste as resource. This joint project team met several times with senior representatives of DTI and DEFRA with positive outcomes. DEFRA is still there today, of course. DTI has gone through various name changes and is now more or less BEIS. But it was very interesting in those days that I well recall our first meeting with them in DTI's offices in Great Victoria Street. And we, as the project team, had to introduce these senior officials from DTI and DEFRA to each other. It was a classic example of lack of joined-up thinking in government at that point, and perhaps not that much better today. In November 2006, a historic joint meeting of the ICE and IMechE councils was held. This was with a view to the possibility of merging the institutions, which the findings of the project team were presented, and it was agreed by both institutions that the project should continue. And so in February 2006, we published a joint document called The Case for a Resource Management Strategy. And this formalized the whole concept of waste as resource. We followed that up in March 2007 with a further document, How to Deliver a Resource Management Strategy. And this took the concept of waste as resource to strategic implementation level. The following publication of this report and the what I consider unfortunate failure of ICE and IMechE to merge into a joint institution, the WA project team was disbanded. However, IMechE, through its Energy, Environment and Sustainability Group, EESG, which is responsible for this webinar today, decided to take up the WAR project alone. The new project team decided to focus on the much misunderstood field of energy from waste, EFW, in an attempt to rectify the common but scientifically uninformed view that these are incinerators. Here you see the report that we produced in December 2008 called Energy from Waste, a Wasted Opportunity. And this took the world by storm at the time. It was reckoned to be the most successful report that IMechE had ever produced in terms of column inches it generated in the media. In fact, we were on with the report, we were on the first page of the Daily Telegraph for several days running, and incurring some adverse comment from DEFRA and the likes on the way. But the report was taken up by the Conservative Party, who were then in opposition, and adopted as their policy. Just before we leave that, you can see on the front page of the report a paper mountain. It wasn't particularly my choice, but that's what we ended up having on there. And paper is one of those very difficult areas of waste where it's not really possible to say whether it's easier to recycle or to use as a fuel. And just on the right-hand side there, you can see a graph showing how at the time we wrote the report, the UK had taken the decision to not deal with most of its paper in this country, but to export it for other people to deal with in whatever way they fancied. And here you can, and on the following page, you can see that most of our paper was being exported, particularly to China. And these graphs date back to 2015, and you can see the enormous impact that has, but also to several other countries around the world. Now, one of the things we refer to in the report is Operation Green Fence, which was where the Chinese decided they didn't want any more of our waste paper. And you can see the effect of that in this much more recent graph, where the orange section there shows how, following Operation Green Fence, the exports to China reduced away to nothing. And because we couldn't handle any more paper waste domestically, we've had to find other export markets. Now, some people think that's okay. The big problem with that is that we've plenty evidence that we have no control whatsoever over what other countries do with paper waste that we export to them. I've seen some quite appalling ways of dealing with the problem. Then in April 2009, IMechE produced a policy statement, which is the subject of today's rewrite, on waste as a resource, which caused some consternation because of its radical proposals, which were to replace the waste hierarchy, deal with all waste streams, and adopt a zero to landfill policy. First of all, replace the waste hierarchy to ensure it actually delivers the nation's needs, which are the prevention of waste at source, climate change mitigation, and the recovery of energy and materials, valuable resources which will reduce imports and secure our future. Second, deal with all waste streams, not just household waste, currently then only 11% of the UK's total waste, and start developing effective strategies for commercial, industrial, construction, demolition, and agricultural waste. And then third, adopt a zero to landfill approach and publish independently audited, transparent data on the recovery and destination markets of materials and energy in the form of heat, transport, and electricity. So the next point I want to talk about is the circular economy. I find I've been teaching this in universities now for around 15 years, so it's not a new subject, despite the fact that many people seem to think it is. And unfortunately, it's another of those definitions which has become quite hackneyed and corrupted over the past few years, mainly because people aren't understanding what it's about. It's right up there really with the misuse of the term recycling, which now is very difficult to tell even what recycling means. It's getting that way with the circular economy, unfortunately. But the concept of the circular economy was first proposed in Braungart and McDonough's book, Cradle to Cradle, Remaking the Way We Think, Remaking the Way We Make Things, which was published in the UK in 2008. It was actually published in the USA several years earlier than that, where I first came across it. The circular economy builds on the cradle-to-cradle concept, which calls for a radical change in industry involving a switch from a cradle-to-grave pattern to a cradle-to-cradle pattern. And despite DEFRA's claims that recycling is an important component of the circular economy, Braungart and McDonough suggested that the reduce, reuse, recycle mantra, with which we're all very familiar, merely perpetuates a cradle-to-grave philosophy. And we need to be cognizant of that. So the traditional manufacturing economy operates in a linear manner: take, make, dispose. So we extract, that is, take raw materials which are manufactured, make, into product which is designed to have a finite life, after which, whether by function or fashion, we discard, dispose of the product, i.e. waste it. Traditional disposal was by either landfill or incineration. Replacement products usually followed the same linear manufacturing economy, and both materials and energy were regarded as single-use only. As we became aware that we were running out of both materials and sustainable energy, concepts such as the waste hierarchy were developed. However, the waste hierarchy has done little to reduce waste and has not greatly encouraged reuse. It has merely encouraged a higher level of what it calls recycling, and to some extent what it calls energy recovery. The circular economy actually requires engineering design. It's not really possible without engineering design, and it is based on the use of reusable materials designed for disassembly and sustainable energy. And following a nutrient cycle, materials are divided into biological nutrients, principally from natural sources, and technical nutrients, which are reusable in some form or another. These nutrients are used in various combinations to form new products and cycles. New products and cycles can ultimately be repeated indefinitely. So the existing waste hierarchy can be seen as merely tweaking the linear economy, improving it certainly, but not replacing it. Materials may go through one recycling or even two, but the material is constantly degrading and is better described as downcycling. This helps to put DEFRA's viewpoint of waste as a problem into perspective. Viewing waste as a resource is much more in keeping with the concept of a circular economy. Though the circular economy could move the world from using waste as a noun to using waste as a verb, it proposes a world where all materials are regarded as precious and the concept of deliberately wasting materials is eradicated. By design, everything has a use. This is not the same thing as a concept such as zero waste, which largely describes a political ambition. It lacks a coherent strategy and relies on renaming and manipulation, not design, to be effective. However, the concept of a circular economy as currently proposed has flaws. Neither Braungart, a German chemist, nor Madonna, a US architect, has expertise in the field of energy, or I'd have to say in business for that matter. There is an underlying assumption that adequate quantities of sustainable energy will be available in perpetuity, not a particularly credible concept, and in today's circumstances, highly unlikely. Consequently, energy efficiency in supply and demand is not rated highly, and this is contrary to the principles of IMechE's energy hierarchy, a subject on which I've spoken a number of times. Regarding waste as a total resource is much more in line with the true circular economy than is the current practice of downcycling materials. It also goes part way to answering the question of where our future energy will come from. In previous times, few people were asking this question, but you listen to any radio, television, media program today, it is by far the biggest question currently facing our nation. It clearly cannot be morally superior to insist on material recycling or downcycling, which requires large amounts of energy, while opposing the recycling of sustainable energy back into the economy. That just doesn't make sense. So, coming now to rethinking the waste hierarchy. As previously described, the existing waste hierarchy tends to see waste as a problem, not as a resource. The two main priorities of the hierarchy, reduce and reuse, while laudable objectives and strongly to be supported, have been found difficult to achieve in an affluent throwaway society such as the UK. Consequently, almost all the focus over the past 2 decades has been on the third tier of the hierarchy, recycle, and setting arbitrary recycling targets that have neither had clear definition nor the practical grounding to be effective. This has resulted in the point of the hierarchy being lost. Despite recycling almost always being associated with materials and recovery with energy, there is no obvious reason why energy cannot be recycled or material recovered. The distinction is therefore somewhat artificial. Contrary to historically prevailing political outlooks, there is no one method of dealing sustainably with all waste streams, and each needs to be separately evaluated as to whether it lends itself ideally to being converted into another material item or into energy for power, heat, and transport. One should not be considered more important than the other. Both treat waste as a resource, so whether materials, energy, or both are recovered should depend on the relative suitability, see examples below, of the waste stream, as well as on the commercial market for what is recovered. Instead of relying on the present one-size-fits-all approach, loosely called recycling, some waste streams, for example metals, PET bottles, should be given a material prioritization strategy, while others, for example biodegradable materials, should be given an energy prioritization strategy. Although source segregation of waste remains a prerequisite and is vital to both, it is important to emphasize that source segregation is not recycling. Recognizing the artificial nature of the separation of recycling and recovery, we propose a modification to the waste hierarchy, see the following diagram, which reduces it to 4 tiers. This leaves the first 2 tiers as the priority they should be and should always have been, removes the unhelpful competition between recycling and recovery, and helps to focus attention on minimizing the reject tier, that is landfill. Zero to landfill is an achievable objective. It's already been almost achieved in several EU countries, whereas zero waste is not realistic. So the proposed waste hierarchy is an attempt to restore the waste hierarchy to its original status as a useful tool, instead of a vehicle for technically deficient political ambitions. And we start with reduce and prevent. We follow that in the second tier with reuse and refurbish. But then in the third tier, we combine recycle and recover to give them equal status. And finally, the one none of us want to do, reject. And this gives recycle and recover equal status depending on whether a material or energy prioritization is required. So the policy recommendations, and these are the ones from the new report which will be published today. First, replace the waste hierarchy with a model that genuinely delivers on the prevention of waste. The existing waste hierarchy has outlived its usefulness, and there needs to be a considerable reassessment of the way we view and deal with waste throughout the UK. The primary premise of its replacement must acknowledge that reducing or preventing waste of all types is paramount. Not producing the waste in the first place has by far the most beneficial effect on the environment. Second, release the value of our resources. Where waste is inevitable and products not practically reusable, careful consideration must be given to achieve optimum use of all waste streams. Since waste is so diverse, it is obvious that there cannot be a single solution. Plants should be optimized so that some waste streams, as I said before, metals, PET bottles, the obvious ones, are given a material prioritization strategy, while others, biodegradable materials, are given an energy prioritization strategy. So we have to look at all waste streams in their own light. 3, adopt a zero to landfill approach. For many reasons, example, lack of new sites, the European Landfill Directive, environmental hazards, landfill is no longer an acceptable way of dealing with waste. Zero waste, however, is not a smart, that is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timed target, but a zero to landfill target is, and is much more likely to have greater impact. it is also essential to have transparent, independently audited, published data on the recovery and destination markets of both materials and energy in the form of heat, transport, and electricity. Fourth, legislation must deal with all waste streams, not just household. The government must not focus solely on new legislation on waste from households, currently only 12% of the total, and commercial and industrial waste, 19%, and start developing effective strategies also for construction, demolition, and excavation waste and other wastes. And fifth, and one of my key desires from this policy is community involvement. Instead of having things done to us as we are so familiar with in this country, start taking some responsibility ourselves. So use locally produced waste to heat and power local communities. There must be a far greater degree of community involvement. We envisage a scenario already existing in other European countries where a local community is responsible for its own waste and processes it into marketable products, electric power, district heating, and even transport fuel, as well as recovered materials. Positive climate change mitigation impact would be enormous. The transport of waste would be avoided, and the community would have complete ownership of the whole process. This is not a new idea of mine. I've been talking on this for many, many years, but think of the impact that that would have on the current crises that we face in this country of ours. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm sure there'll be some questions.
Hello?
Hello?
Sorry, you didn't, I've got disconnected there. I'll repeat the question. Can you hear me, Ian?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So there's a question from David McDonald about lithium-ion batteries and problems with toxicity. Would it not be wise to limit the production of lithium-ion batteries until we have a fully operational reuse and recycling chain? If we do not do so, will we not be in danger of yet again offshoring our toxic waste to third world countries?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting point. I think it's a bit beyond the scope of this particular webinar, but all I would say on that is that we've never had a fully operational waste management strategy in this country, and I'm not sure when we will ever get one. So the question is perfectly valid. Should we be using lithium-ion batteries, or indeed other types of batteries for which we have no designated end-of-life solution? And I think that's a fair point. I'm not sure that it's directly related to this particular theme.
Okay, well, thank you, Ian. Sorry, you probably missed my earlier comment while I was disconnected to the audience. Please, could you put questions in the box to the side of your screen if you're not aware of that already? Got a question here from Owen Meader of BAE Systems. Could you please explain the difference between incineration of waste and energy recovery from waste?
Yes. Well, incineration. I mean, this is a debate that's been going on for at least 25 years, to my knowledge. Incinerating waste is an attempted means to get rid of waste. Energy from waste is not really energy recovery from waste. You're using the waste as a fuel. And so it works exactly the same as any thermal power station does, or any other type of power station. So the two are not really remotely comparable. It's just that it suits some people to some people's arguments to make them sound the same. But energy from waste is an energy generation scheme, and we don't, for instance, in a coal-fired power station, we never referred to that as recovering energy from coal. We regard it as a power station. The only problem with that is that in conventional power stations, in this country at least, we made no attempt to recover the co-generated heat. In a properly built, designed energy from waste plant, we do.
Thank you, Ian. How is government, this is a question from William Quigley of Arqiva. How is government lobbying to adopt the policy recommendations taking place?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand that question. Could you repeat it?
Well, how are the policy recommendations from the Waste as a Resource report being taken forward to lobby government?
Well, that remains to be seen. The report has only been published today, and we now have to find ways and means of getting those recommendations through to government. Now, I've been trying to lobby government for the past 25 years without, it would have to be said, a huge amount of success. But that's more because of government's refusal to listen rather than our lack of willingness to recommend. So we'll no doubt be faced with the same again, and it's unfortunate in that respect that coming out on the day of the announcement of the new Prime Minister that it will probably be very hard to get anybody to listen to us at this juncture, but we can but try.
Thanks, Ian. Just to let you know, we've got quite a few questions coming in here, and that might change the way in which you respond. I'm not saying you're going to be filling time unnecessarily, but you've generated a lot of interest. Can you make any? This is from Richard Osborne of Ricardo UK Limited. Can you make any comments about the production of liquid fuels from waste?
Not really. That's a bit beyond my area of experience. I've certainly some limited experience of production of biofuels from waste, but that's really a downstream process. It's not directly related to the area I'm talking about, but obviously it is a significant area of opportunity.
Okay, thank you. This is a question from Jill Dwyer, Business Development Manager at the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. Is there any prospect for this approach to make a difference in the short term while we are facing an energy crisis?
Well, I don't think there's very much any of us can do in the short term as far as the energy crisis is concerned. We should have been dealing with this energy crisis by taking precautionary measures over the past 20 years. It's not our fault that as engineers that there's a crisis at the moment. Some of us, particularly in EESG, have been foreseeing this for many, many years. But a great start would be if government would start listening to engineers, because they haven't shown any meaning to up until now.
Yeah, thank you. There's a question from Cara Lang of Vectin Limited. There is legislation already in progress to facilitate local energy, the local electricity bill. Do you believe an analogous local waste bill would be a simple spin-off?
Well, yes. The point I ended on is that my dream would be to have energy and waste dealt with at local level, but that's extremely hard to implement in a country that just doesn't think that way. It's much more the way things are done in other Northern European countries, but in this country we've got a long record of sitting back and letting other people do things for us, and so what we need there would be massive behaviour change, which I'm all in favour of, but we should not pretend it's going to be easy.
No. There's a question from Rhoda Line. How do you see public bodies managing their waste in the future when a lot of the choices are locked into framework agreements?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I don't think it's going to be very easy at all, because we have set up this system of framework agreements, and all of that would have to be revised and rethought if we were going to do it in the way I'm recommending. But the fact that we're not doing it right at the moment doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive to do it right in the future.
No. There's a question from Richard Percival Alwyn. How do we get manufacturers to buy into the cradle-to-cradle system?
Yeah, this question comes up quite a lot, and I think it probably stems from the background of most people in this country is not in manufacturing, and manufacturers think very differently from the way most non-manufacturing people think they do. Manufacturers generally will make whatever they can sell, so the real change has to come with the consumer, and I mean the consumer across the board, from ordinary people to government, and unless we change what consumers want to buy, manufacturers are frankly unlikely to change, because they have businesses to run and they need to run them profitably.
Yeah. Question from Oladayo Ogunkoya. Many thanks for the presentation. As of today, is the UK still exporting waste paper?
Yes, as far as I am aware, because we don't have the facilities many facilities to deal with waste paper left in this country. So yeah, we have very little option to export it unless we use it as fuel in an energy from waste plant.
Yeah. Question from Jeremy Lambert Shatoku. From a consumer brands perspective, what can we do to improve the perception of waste as a resource?
Not sure I see the connection, particularly with brands, but
well, maybe it's the perception that people see waste as being a dirty business, and it's difficult for them to appreciate it. They might be put off by using products made from waste. And is there anything that needs to be done to make people more enthusiastic about the idea?
Yes, well, if that's what it means, yes, that I can understand that. Again, it really comes back to this. We have been schooled for the past 2 decades at least in thinking of waste as a problem. And so it's understandable that the consumer thinks of waste as a problem. Perhaps in some cases not my problem, but nevertheless it's a problem. And the whole thrust of what we're writing about here is to start seeing it as a useful resource, how we get that message across really goes back to a very basic level. We've got to start teaching it in schools.
Yes. Question here from Peter Barnett of Community Business Projects, an environmental consultant. All good stuff, but politics gets in the way. Local authorities carry the role of planning authorities and develop strategic plans. My authority didn't like land-based wind generation, so just banned their build. How are local authorities to change without statute?
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree with the questioner. Politics does get in the way, and politics gets in the way of just about every subject we could speak about, never mind this particular one. I don't know how we change that. If I did, I would have done something about it. But all I can do, it seems, is keep battering away at the principle and see if somebody eventually will listen.
Yeah. It's a question from Grant Bassett. How effective do you think current specific waste stream recycling is, such as the Viridor Plastics Centre in Avonmouth?
Well, I don't want to get into specific areas. I've written elsewhere at some length particularly about plastic recycling. But I think the thing to bear in mind is that while recycling is material recycling is by its nature a good thing to do, we still struggle in this country with calling things recycling that are not recycling, and so it opens up a much bigger question of how are we going to get recycling back into its proper place, where it is turning it into a different item rather than the current public perception and the perception, and which has been fostered by local authorities, in all honesty, of collecting your waste at the curbside being called recycling. It just isn't, and until we start making that distinction, I don't think we're going to solve this problem.
No. It's a question from Grant Campbell. Thank you for an interesting talk and for your long-standing efforts to help move this difficult topic forward. A problem with terminology is that the word waste has legal implications that currently preclude a stream labelled as waste from being legally allowed to be used as a resource. A necessary part of the solution is therefore to remove the legal implications of the word waste, make it illegal to define the stream as waste, or find some other way to unblock the legal prohibition of using waste as a resource. What are your thoughts on that?
My only thought on that is that I 100% agree. I think that is absolutely key to what we're trying to do here. But again, it's not going to be easy. There's so much already committed in this area, and unfortunately, it's committed in the wrong direction.
Yeah. There's a question from Prasanna Kumar Jagan Mohan. As we have seen, reduce and reuse are the most recommended steps for sustainable way. Why not companies producing domestic products are not coming up with a way to promote reuse of their bottles and stuffs? It also gives them a marketing strategy that they are also concerned about the waste. So why aren't companies doing more?
I mean, it's absolutely right that reuse and reuse are easily the best ways of dealing with this. But what we're dealing with here, again, it comes back to what I said earlier about manufacturers. It's not really the manufacturers who are the problem here. Manufacturers will make whatever we want to buy. It's up to us as the consumers to change, and it's going to require a massive change to achieve that. Very necessary if we want to be successful, but it's not going to be easy.
No. And another question on timescale and the challenge from Joseph Ellerton. What sort of timescale do you think is involved in reaching the ideal scenario of local communities being involved in their own waste management?
I would, unlike government, I don't like putting timescales on things because 50 years of experience in industry has told me that they never meet their timescales anyway. So why bother trying to put one on? But I repeat again, this is going to require a massive rethink of the way we do things, from consumer through retailers, through manufacturers, through local authorities, through government. Everything needs to be rethought because it's not working at the moment.
Sure. Time for probably two more questions. One from Hitan Vaidya, Coventry University. Should recycling capabilities be standardised throughout the country? Different local authorities seem to offer different services.
Well, yes, you've put your finger on a very important point. It does vary very considerably regionally, different local authorities, and I would certainly welcome a universal definition of what we mean by all the terms in the waste hierarchy, for example. And I think unless we have that, I don't think we can solve this problem.
No. Well, finally, just a quick answer to this, if you can, Ian, so I can round up in time for the end, please. From Adrian Alford of Innovatium Group Limited. Hi, Ian. How do you fit materials which will have limited availability, i.e. will run out or be increasingly expensive to mine, into the hierarchy?
Thanks, Adrian. That's a very big question, and I certainly can't answer that quickly, but it is perhaps a question for all of us to take away with us and think about, because it is a very, very good question.
Great. Well, let's all go away and think about that. You've given us so much to think about, Ian, and thank you very much indeed for an excellent talk and also responses to the questions. And thank you all for your great questions. It's been a really good discussion. I'll close it now. We've come to the end, but many thanks again to Ian, and please look out for subsequent EESG webinars. Bye, everyone.